I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time out, we have a very special guest joining us, Jeff Sandstrom here.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here at Sweetwater.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
So, live sound man extraordinaire. Been on the road with Chris Tomlin for a number of years, right?
Yeah, almost 8 years.
So how did you get started doing the live sound thing?
So I started as a studio guy. I was a music major in college and was actually a trumpet major. I had aspirations of being a symphony musician.
Right.
And kind of grew up in that world and got to about the end of my sophomore year of college, and guys who were older than me who could play circles around me were getting out of school, not getting jobs in orchestras.
Right.
And so I thought, let's find another area of interest in music where I might be able to contribute a little more. So
right.
Took a couple recording classes and kind of got bitten by the production bug at that time. So finished my degree in music, but always had the intention of kind of being more in the studio, kind of behind the glass on the production
right.
side of things. And so moved to Atlanta after college and got plugged into some studios there and started doing album production, mostly custom records for independent artists. I did a few projects for Integrity Music, a series for them under the Shout Worship Kids brand. Got a couple of Dove Awards and kind of was in that world. And
right.
live sound for me at the time was, I was doing some mixing at my church and had gotten involved through that avenue. But at the time, studio to live for me was about an 80-20 mix toward the studio.
Right.
And then in the mid-2000s or so, became connected with Passion Conferences and their movement to influence college students and host events for them. And as the exposure to that grew, then they asked me to come and mix for some events for them, and that's when I first met Chris.
Okay.
Was 05, 06. And then 2007, his front of house guy at the time was leaving to go be the in-house monitor engineer at the Grand Ole Opry. And so they asked me if I would come out and kind of take his place. And I said, no, I don't want to be on the road. I don't want to travel. And the guy said, well, just come out for a couple festivals we have this summer and you can kind of fill in until we find somebody. And that was almost 8 years ago. We haven't found my replacement yet.
So they got you.
They got me, yeah. Yeah.
That's one way to overcome objections, right?
Yeah.
Just do it for a little while.
That's right, yeah. But I got the good end of the deal for sure.
That's great.
It's been a great experience.
Right, right. So is that typically how that type of a position happens? Do you apply for that job? Do you audition for it like you would a musician coming into a band or something?
I think in production world, especially in Christian music, it's a little more organic than that. I never had an audition or filled out an application. It was just they saw what I did based on what I did through my church. They liked what they heard, and it kind of grew from there. And I think churches have a great opportunity as they're training younger people and as guys who are really showing aptitude and interest are coming up through the ranks of that. And imagine a guy who's kind of mixing for the youth band and then gets to mix for big church and then
right.
gets exposure at a conference or something like that. That competency level will, the cream will rise. And I think as artists come in and are a part of events like that, they may catch somebody's eye, or you may get noticed by an artist that says, that was a really good monitor mix, or
right.
wow, that guy really knows what he's doing. Let's try to, bring him out as a tech or as an assistant and kind of feel him out. And I think, there's a relational side of it that's really important, as well as a technical competency side. And I think when those two things come together, especially in the world that I'm in with worship music, it's a really exciting thing for guys like me to be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. So the moral of the story that I take away from what you said there is, number one, be prepared. Number two, always do your best.
Absolutely.
Always put on your best show that you can. And number three, you probably have to be a decent person to be around. That's kind of got to be an aspect of it as well.
And I think that's true in whatever area of music you're interested in, whether
right.
it's pop, rock, country, death metal. I mean, nobody wants to be on the road with guys who aren't fun to be around. And I think, for me, when I'm looking at, new people coming on the road or, hey, how's this tour going to be this time around? It's always about the hang as much as it is about the technique. And, you know, I'd take a hard worker who's willing to, you know, serve the tour, who might not have the most experience, over a guy who really knows what he's doing, who's a jerk any day.
Yeah, right.
And I think anybody would.
Right.
But it's just sometimes we forget. You know, we get caught up in the task or the skill, and sometimes it's easy to forget about the people part. You know, you've got this team of guys dressed in black coming through the back door every day, and it's easy for them to kind of get lost in the shuffle of how much personality matters and how much relationships matter, and you know, that side of it is super important.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the technical competency side of it.
Sure.
How does somebody go about learning that? Is that something you go to school for? Do you take classes in it, workshops? I know you've taught some workshops and things around.
Yeah, so there are things like that available, and I think there are schools that have really good programs for that. I think over the years, though, you know, and you may know better than me, but I think audio engineering for live sound especially seems to have more of like an apprenticeship or a trade school kind of tradesman history. In other words, I think modern recording programs in universities is a relatively recent phenomenon.
Sure.
And I think you know, there are places who do that really well, and then there's the associate's degree trade school type things. You know, you've got the Full Sails of the world that do a fine job. But I think most of what my experience has been, you know, learning by doing. And one of the great takeaways that I have from my studio experience is there were times when I had the luxury of time to, even if I wasn't charging the client, to really sit behind the console and go, what is this EQ really doing? And what is this compressor, what happens when I turn this knob, and what do my ears tell me is going on here? And that's experience that is invaluable, that doesn't come from a classroom necessarily. When you have the time with the tools to be able to really understand what a particular piece of gear is doing, what a particular concept means.
Right.
You know, how does a 3 dB boost at 3K sound through this EQ that's different from a 3 dB boost at 3K through this EQ, and how do those nuances inform your musical sensibility? And the biggest thing for me, though, in all of that was approaching it as a musician, not as a technician. For me, the technology is just a tool. You know, there are guys who are great engineers who are engineers in the traditional sense of the word, a scientific type, you know, electrical engineer. I'm not that guy. If you want your amplifier rebuilt and your channel strip to be resoldered, there are guys who are great at that that aren't me. Because I'm much more of a musician, sort of artistic guy in the way that I approach things. In other words, for me, the soundboard is my instrument. I was a trumpet major, now I'm a soundboard major. And so I understand the tool from a technical side in terms of a user, but for me the approach is from the musical side. And so when I interact with the artist and when I try to serve them in my role, I think that's one thing that served me really well, is that I understand kind of the language that they speak as a musician and as an artist. So I'm able to kind of build a bridge between the sound booth and the stage in a way that some guys may struggle with, which has really served me well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little like, you know, the whole Malcolm Gladwell thing, right? 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. And the musicians do that. But I don't think people who want to be sound engineers necessarily always approach it that way, but it is still something you have to practice, and you have to have that innate curiosity about it to really want to do what you're talking about. What does 3K sound like? What does 4K sound like?
Absolutely. And I think those, you know, people who take the time to really dive into that kind of stuff are the ones who are going to set themselves apart. You know, so it's not just, you know, especially now with digital consoles, and technology has changed so much that I think we have a generation of kids who think, well, I like computers and I'm kind of good at video games, so I can do this too. And that's fine. That gets you to a certain point. But to really be kind of next level and to be that outlier, to use the Gladwell example, I think you really have to take the time to dive in and hone that part of it. And that's really going to differentiate you from the rest of the pack.
Sure, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about how a tour comes together.
Yeah.
Because you're obviously at the upper echelon of the touring, you know, you're at the top up here, and there's a whole spectrum of levels of touring underneath that. But there still is a consistency and an approach to what you're doing that you can take away and apply to whatever level you're
Sure.
at. So tell us a little bit about how you know, what happens. So they say, we're going to do a tour. Do you then say, well, I want 10, 15-inch speakers on the bass, and I want this console, and I want this, and I'm going to do it this way? Or how does that come together?
So for our particular scenario, we have a team of people who work together on that. So I'm the front of house engineer, but we have a monitor engineer who kind of also acts as sort of the audio production manager. We have a production manager for the tour who manages all of the crew for audio, video, and lighting.
Okay.
And then we have a tour manager who's responsible for working with management to figure out budgets and venues and numbers. And so it's, you know, all of those departments interact. You know, the audio team, we have a wish list of, hey, we want to have, you know, 2 trucks
all the
cool toys, and you know, and management says, well, we're not going to do that. So we have to accommodate, obviously, for all those, you know, variables. And so we do look in advance at the venues that are planned, just to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of gear for coverage and for the SPL that we want to be able to, you know, assure the artist and the audience that this is going to be a great sounding experience.
Right.
And we have great relationships with the vendors that provide that gear. So we work with, the artist that I work with doesn't own any of the PA or any of the production gear, so that's all rented. So for this particular tour, we use Mid-America Sound here in Indiana, and they've provided the gear for the audio portion of our tour for the last several tours. And they do a great job. They're mostly L Acoustics products, and so right now we're touring with K1 for our mains, and L Acoustics Cara for the side hangs and downfills and front fills. And it's been such a great experience for us because it's that particular PA is just, it's super transparent. It sounds great. You know, you can get it as loud as you want, and it just gets bigger. It never gets harsh. It's a beautiful system. But in the planning stages, you know, we are looking at venue size. We're looking at truck space. You know, we're trying to accommodate all of the audio gear in one truck. So it has to pack well, and it has to be, you know, it just has to make sense logistically for what we're trying to do. Because we're on this current tour, we have 3 trucks. So we have audio and video and lighting all have to be accommodated. Well, this is the biggest production that we've done. We're doing arenas that are, you know, 7,000 and up in attendance. And so we have a lot of lighting gear and a lot of video gear. And so they're basically taking up 2 of the 3 trucks. And then we have our audio stuff on 1 truck and then some more lighting on the tail. So we have the least amount of truck space because we don't carry truss, we don't carry, you know, big moving lights and set pieces. So all of our stuff has to pack real efficiently and get in and out quickly. So that's a huge consideration as well. But
right. And that is with, again, any size gig that you're doing. I mean, you don't want to show up to the club and have to take 5 hours to unload the truck.
Exactly.
You know, if you take the time to plan in advance how the things are going to come off the truck, so you can place them on stage in the right order.
Yeah.
You know, and not have to be moving things twice. You know, that was something I learned very early on.
Absolutely.
Is moving things more than once just tires you out.
Yeah. So for us, for our load-in procedure, we've got 3 trucks. So the first truck that comes in is all the rigging and motors and steel and set carts and the stuff that has to be rigged before anything can be hung. And that happens first thing. And then lighting comes in next because they take the longest, you know, putting together their truss and setting fixtures in place. And that's the most labor intensive in terms of stage-hands, and our crew, you know, they've got a lot of work to do. And the third truck is audio, and we kind of work together interdepartmentally to make sure we stay out of each other's way. And we have a plan for, okay, this is always going to go to this spot on the floor, so that when the next guy walks in, he knows, oh yeah, that's supposed to be there, and I know to work around it. You know, so we're not, you know, we're working on that during production rehearsals and pre-planning, so that we know that, okay, this area is always reserved for, you know, lighting's power distribution, and audio is always over here. And the reason audio is stage left is because most of the time in most buildings, their disconnect for local power in the audio department is going to be stage left. So we plan all of our stuff accordingly so that if there is a general trend like that, we're prepared for it. So we have the right length of cable, the right number of cases, they're going to be in the right place, so that we're not having to run 100 feet of feeder to the power distro one day and then 300 feet the next day and 20 feet the next day. We're kind of trying to maintain some consistency so that our cables are all loomed properly, and we've got, you know, bundles of cable that are able to come out of trunks efficiently and go back in quickly and that kind of thing. So I think for the smaller bands and for smaller club kind of acts, that's a huge lesson you can learn right away, is how can we make our system and our setup more efficient so that we make the club owner happy, we make their local crew happy, we make our own band and our guys happy, that, you know, setup is easy. You can rely on us to be not only kind and easy to work with, but we're going to be efficient, we're going to get up quick, do what we need to do, and get out quick. And that just makes everything run more seamlessly.
Sure, sure. So do you extend that, I assume you extend that planning to how you approach doing a sound check every day. So can you take us a little bit through the process of what you do as the front of house engineer as far as getting a sound check together?
Sure. So before that, let me back up, because I think the planning part even applies to the gear on stage and cabling and microphones. For example, for us, everything that we do is color-coded. So if you were a stagehand for me tomorrow at our show, I could open up our mic stand case and our microphone case, and I could say to you, okay, all these stands are color-coded with a label. So if you want to help, take out the blue stands, put them here, put the red stands here, put the white stands here, and there's a microphone with the same color and the same label. So just match the microphone to the stand, and the overhead stage left mic goes on this red stand with the red label, and it's plugged into a red stage box with a red cable.
Nice.
And so it's all
foolproof,
really streamlined, so that anybody can walk up to it. Even if you're not an audio guy, you can walk up to it and know what to do with some simple instructions. So again, just that simple step of planning. You know, before the tour, we're in the shop prepping those cables, making sure we have the right length, those labels are made, our input list is matching those colors and names, so that when it says, you know, Matt Vocal, it's a SM58 with a blue label on it that says Matt Vocal, the cable says Matt Vocal, the input on the stage box says Matt Vocal, and everybody knows what to do.
Right.
So once we get to sound check, then we're much more assured that everything's plugged in properly, that we haven't missed anything, you know, that we're all ready to go. So that when sound check happens, we're not putting out fires because we weren't prepared.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference.
Sure, sure. I can imagine that organization's got to be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when it comes to the sound check, you know, I'm sure you've seen, and I've seen and been a part of many sound checks where you go and you say, okay, let's have the kick drum, and the bass player's playing and the keyboard player's playing and the vocalist is saying check, 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 and you can't hear the kick drum.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
How do you approach managing that and working with your musicians?
Yeah. So we try to. We have a great group of guys in the band who understand. They don't want to be on stage longer than they have to, doing that kind of monotonous thing. They want to get to playing the songs or rehearsing a new song or figuring out the set. So they want the process to go as quickly and efficiently as it can.
Right.
So they're on this. We've been able to communicate what we need to them to make that as fast as possible. And so we have a great relationship in terms of that level of communication where they're on our side at that point. So if there is something that we need to check, you know, obviously it gets better and better as you go throughout the tour or throughout the rehearsal. But on the first day of rehearsals, there's a lot of stuff that's new for everybody. So yeah, there is okay, let's check the kick, and it's just kick, kick,
Right.
kick. So while he's doing that, I'm setting EQ and gain and whatever other adjustments I need to make at front of house, while our monitor engineer is setting levels for their in-ears. And so we're both trying to work as quickly as we can, and we know over the years we've developed, hey, here's what I think is a good kick drum sound. So in advance of sound check, I've already kind of pre-dialed in some stuff that I think is going to work.
Okay.
So I've got some EQ that I think is going to be close, and I've got some compression settings or some gain structure that I think is going to work, I will have gone through my file in the console and already done high-pass filters on just about everything, low-pass filters where needed, just kind of a basic template that I can go, okay, I know this is a pretty good starting point, so that when it is time to get the details, I'm just making tweaks, and I'm not starting from scratch.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty valuable lesson too, especially in today's world with digital consoles. I'm not saying that everything has to be copy-paste and that you can assume that it's going to be the exact same from day to day or musician to musician, but over time you do gain a sense of, okay, generally speaking, this is what I'm going to do to an acoustic guitar, or this is what I'm going to do to a kick drum, or this is how my snare drum is really going to pop out of the mix. And once you kind of have those tools in your back pocket, you can start to make some assumptions. I know that an SM57 on a snare drum tends to sound this way, so here's what I usually do. And as an engineer, you just kind of have that go-to, again, it just makes everything quicker, and it helps you get up and running faster.
Right.
So during our sound check, we'll tend to, at the first day of rehearsals, let's say, we'll just go down the line of the input list. And again, I'm kind of tonally getting the sounds that I like per instrument, per channel. And then Kyle, our monitor engineer, is doing the same for the band in their ears and getting level set for their monitors. But once we've gotten through that point, then tomorrow's sound check is going to look a little different for me. I think for people who approach sound check that way, where we start channel 1 and go all the way down, I think there's a tendency sometimes, especially with people who are less experienced, that you start with the kick drum, and so it's kick, 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 and then you try to pile everything on top of that as you move down the line.
Right.
And there's a tendency, I've heard some mixes where the kick drum is the most important thing in the mix, or it seems that it is.
Sure.
Because everything has been built around this first thing that they heard. And so, yeah, the kick drum is a foundational element, especially in pop rock music. But in worship music and in the church setting, to me, the most important thing is the vocal. So, that's what people are going to engage with. That's what's being communicated. That's what people are going to sing along with.
Right.
So for me, once we get past that first initial line check, so to speak, I always want to have the vocal in the PA when I'm building around a sound check.
Okay.
So I like having the vocal, even if we're using virtual sound check, where we're checking the PA through recorded tracks. I always want to have the vocal in there, even if I'm listening to the kick drum, so I can hear the relationship. Okay. And I think that really helps, particularly for our style of music, because the vocal is so important.
Sure.
So I would say that's also true with country. That's also true with pop. People buy a ticket to hear Justin Timberlake. They don't buy a ticket to hear Justin Timberlake's kick drum.
Right.
And so it's just it's a tip that I think some people could probably benefit from, of just, okay, let's keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
I think it's important to craft a great kick drum sound when you can, but not at the expense of some of the other things that are musically maybe more important.
Right. I think it comes down to, a lot of, in the studio, a lot of times you don't want to rely too much on soloing instruments for that same reason. You want to have context.
Exactly.
And so you're developing a context for where all these instruments sit in, again, relation to what's the main thing. If it's a jazz band, maybe it's the saxophone lead, whatever's the lead instrument or the lead vocal or whatever it might be.
And it's not just sonically in terms of tonality. You've got phase issues. You've got, especially in a live setting, if you've got, we use a kick drum in and out mic. So we've got a Beta 91 and a Beta 52 in our kick drum, and we've got snare top and snare bottom. So I always try to make sure that I listen to the drum kit, for example, with the overhead soloed, so I can get a picture of what the kit sounds like. And then I'll add other mics in there to make sure that, each instrument has a good sound individually, but as a whole, as I'm adding things, it's not creating phase problems or balance problems.
Right.
So it's
right. Yeah, you want to maintain.
You want to hear it in context.
Yeah, exactly right. Now you've mentioned several times that you know what a kick drum sounds like. You want to have a good snare drum sound, a good tom sound. I've had the experience, and maybe you have as well, of going into studios, going into churches, going into clubs and things with a sound man who maybe hasn't done a lot of things, and I see them back there twisting knobs. And sometimes I'll just ask, and I'll say, well, what do you want the kick drum to sound like when when I'm trying to help or whatever? How do you develop that sense of what should the kick drum sound like? What should the snare drum sound like? How should the vocal be placed?
So I think there's a couple things I would say about that. One is I want to hear how the instrument sounds as the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm working, our drummer just got a new kit last year. So the first thing that I wanted to do is I want to hear how these drums sound acoustically in the room when you're playing them. So no amplification. I just stood in front of the kit. And I want to hear how this kick drum sounds, because it's a 24-inch kick drum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big sound, but it sounds different than maybe a smaller DW kick that's a real tight thing. So it's like, okay, how can I accomplish what I want the kick drum to feel like in an arena PA with this drum that might be different from this other drum? So knowing what the instrument sounds like on its own, I think, is the first step.
Okay.
And then figuring out, okay, do I want to try to replicate that sound in the PA, or do I want to manipulate that sound in a way that's different from what I'm hearing acoustically? That's another question. So if I want to replicate the sound, I'll put a microphone in front of it and hear how it sounds.
Right.
But you also have to know the characteristic of the microphone that you're using, and what does proximity effect do? For example, where should I put this mic in the kick drum? Should I put it close inside the drum, close to the beater?
Right.
Should I put it outside the hole? Is there a hole in the kick drum? Do we need to figure out how to cut a hole in the front head?
Right.
Those are questions that, again, having a relationship with the musician really helps, because he may have a sound in his head that he wants that is this real sort of, open, organic thing, and I'm thinking, no, I want a tight pop rock kick drum sound. Well,
Right.
if we're not on the same page, then you don't want to create conflict. I don't want him to change the way he's playing because he's not giving me enough attack, or give me too much attack if it's like a jazz type situation or whatever. There's a lot of variables. But I would say, in terms of knowing what you want, I think it's important to listen to a lot of great recordings.
Right.
Listen to recordings of the artists that you're mixing, because they might have, you might be able to get clues on their preference and their approach of what they're trying to deliver with their music that might be different from the music that you like to listen to. For example, if in the church music setting, there are different artists who have different approaches and different sounds. So if you're thinking one thing and they're trying to communicate something different, there's tension there.
Right.
So again, knowing their material, knowing what you prefer, knowing how to get the sound to do either of those things, I think is crucial.
Sure. And knowing the gear well enough to say, I need to change the microphone. I'm not getting out of this microphone what I need, or I need to change this, or whatever it might be. So that's all part of that. Part of that putting in the time.
Definitely.
That we talked about earlier.
It really is. And it's, I guess it's from the studio background, but just understanding, and there's a lot of great resources out there to get these practical things. For example, when I'm putting an SM57 on a guitar cabinet, moving the microphone an inch can make a huge difference in the tonality of what the microphone is reproducing. So getting a good feel for what those changes are, how to make them, what they do.
Right.
That's only a matter of trial and error, that sometimes you don't have the luxury of time when you're under the gun, on the clock, in the gig. It's like, just throw mics in front of it and make it work. So in order to be able to throw and go, as we say, you need to have enough tools in your toolbox to be able to know, okay, here's my best guess. Here's my best guess here, and we're going to try this, and because sometimes you don't have the time to really tweak.
Right.
So again, I'm sure you guys have a lot of great resources and videos on those kind of things to just know, okay, if I'm this much off axis, or if I put it on the cone or in the center of the speaker or on the edge, how does that change the tonality of this microphone?
Right.
And it's those kind of things are again going to be the thing that set you apart.
Sure.
Both as a studio or a live engineer.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship between the sound engineer and the musicians in a couple of regards. First of all, that whole sound check process. Is there somebody on stage who you go through? Do you go to each individual musician? Who manages that? Who has the say?
So for us, sound check is mostly directed by our keyboard player, who serves as the music director for the band. And so he'll work with the monitor engineer and me to make sure that we have what we need. So if we are doing that initial, okay, kick, then he'll be the one on his talkback mic talking through all the guys in the band, making sure they have everything they need and the level's right and all that. And we'll just kind of go down the line. And then once we're at the point where it's really more of a rehearsal or a line check, then he'll come into sound check knowing, hey, we need to go over this song, we need to rehearse this transition. Hey, let's try to add this song into the set tonight. So he'll have a game plan coming in that he'll communicate with us.
Okay.
Hey guys, we're gonna run over this song, we're gonna do this. Is there anything you need to hear? So he does a great job of kind of back and forth to go, okay, we have what we need, but do you have everything you need? So I might say, hey, I'm having trouble with Tom 1 today, and it's not ringing the way I really would like it to. So can we take a minute and just kind of tweak the toms a little bit? And so we can do things like that before the artist gets on stage. So then when he hits the stage, we're all prepared, and then he can run through whatever he needs to for the show that night.
Right. It's much more efficient.
Much more efficient, yeah.
Right, right. One of the things I've seen strain the relationship between the sound crew and the band is when you do your sound check and you've got everything sounding the way you want it, and then the band hits the stage and everybody plays way louder and they've turned up or they've changed their settings or made things happen. Can you talk a little bit about how to manage that kind of a situation?
Yeah, so it's funny because I've been in a lot of concert settings and also a lot of churches and conferences and other events where, let's say we sound checked last night. You know, we got through that whole process of the tediousness of, okay, we've done a pre-event rehearsal, so to speak. And then come in the next morning for a quick sound check before the event starts, and everybody swears everything's changed. You know, and who messed with my amp, and this is totally different, what's going on? And there's so many factors that play, especially with in-ear monitors. You know, I woke up today with a little bit of a cold. That's going to affect the way I hear things today. You know, so you've got temperature changes and humidity changes and inside your head changes and things that nobody touched your amp last night, but it sounds different somehow. So there's a bit of a give and take communication-wise. I think the wrong thing for the sound guy to say is, well, we didn't change anything from last night, so it's your problem.
Right.
You know, and there is that, I don't know, undeserved problem, but there is this reputation of sometimes you get kind of a stiff arm from the sound booth from the guy going, well, it's not my problem. And I think we need to do a better job of creating a culture of communication that says, I don't think anything's changed, but let me help you figure out what might have changed. Or how can I serve the situation by, if something is different, you know, how can I be proactive so that when I walk in the room, I want to be the first one in the room for that morning check so that I can make sure that nothing did change. Because sometimes a cleaning crew came in last night and somebody kicked a microphone and it went a little sideways.
Right.
Well, of course the guitar sounds different because the mic's not pointed at the cabinet anymore.
Right.
Something as simple as that could be totally circumvented by just a little bit of a pre-check before everybody gets in there. So I have a friend who writes a blog called First In, Last Out. And his whole thing is, you know, the tech team is the first one in the door and the last one to leave, and that's just part of the job. But he's done a great job of creating a culture where that's kind of a badge of honor. You know, it's not a drudgery. It's not, oh, we got to be here so early and we can't leave till the end. It's like, no, we're here to serve the team, And we love being prepared, and we love kind of being the first ones here and geared up and ready to go. So it's just a subtle mind shift, but a really important one, because I think it can really help serve each other in a great way.
Right, right. So once the show is underway, I'm sure everybody's had the experience of something goes wrong. How do you manage that so that the musicians don't lose their flow, so that the show goes on, if you will?
So we have the luxury of some techs that are on site and on stage, side stage, to be available for that kind of thing. So we have a guitar tech who he's responsible for guitar changes during the show and tuning throughout the show, so that Chris doesn't have to worry about that. So if he goes from acoustic to electric, then he's got his tech who's making that change for him and making sure the acoustic's in tune for when it comes back out on stage for the next song. So if anything goes wrong, if he breaks a string, or if there's a pedal that goes out or something, he's there to kind of help troubleshoot. And the same we have a second tech who kind of handles everybody else. So last night, for example, we had one of the tom mics was just freaking out during a song. So he was able to run up, make sure the connection was in, it wasn't quite plugged in all the way. It had gotten unplugged a little bit. So it was just a quick, we can all see where the problem is. Hey, there's something wrong with Tom 1. Luckily, we have somebody who can run up and do a quick check.
Right.
If we didn't have those guys, then that would fall to our monitor engineer, because he's closest to the stage. If you don't have that, then, if you're mixing monitors from front of house and you're in a small club and you're the only guy, then somehow you've got to make the mad dash, yeah. But again, being able to anticipate, okay, what might be the problem? What's the most likely culprit? Because the most likely solution is probably the solution. So it's either a connectivity issue, there's an air gap here, we got to plug this cable back in, or it's a bad cable, or there is a microphone that's malfunctioning or something like that, or any number of things. But just to be able to have a troubleshooting plan, so that you can not just walk up to the stage and think, okay, I've got to change the mic and the cable and the input and the ground lift and the DI. Let's start with the simplest answer and work back from there.
Right.
So that we can, the show has to go on, so it's got to be. Now, if it's a catastrophic thing like power failure or, console failure or something, that's a different, hopefully extremely rare example. But I was at a conference once where we were at a big arena, and there was a truck outside that had an accident, hit a light pole. The whole block lost power. Right. So the whole arena was down.
Wow.
And we weren't on generators, we were on house power, and it was cut.
Right.
So there's not a lot you can do about that.
It's an acoustic show at that point,
It's an acoustic show, yeah. And but everybody, it wasn't a panic moment. It was, okay, what happened? Okay, there's nothing we can do. We're still going to have a great time.
Right.
And it was a great acoustic moment. So,
right.
Again, not having, just being able to keep your head about you and keep, not freak out. It's like, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're professionals. We're experts. Let's figure this out, and we'll move on.
Right.
So, just not freaking out, I think, is the main thing.
Keep going. Right. And they have backups.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if it's just cables.
Cables, microphones. Like, for example, maybe you've got this esoteric mic that you love to use on a particular instrument. Well, we've also got SM57s and 58s that are several spares, that if we need something, we can always throw a mic up. We've always got spare cables. We've always got, spare DIs, so that if there is a failure, and we've always got spare batteries, so that you're never going to get caught with, I don't have any more batteries. That's not an excuse.
Right.
I'm sorry. That's unprofessional.
Right.
That's just a lack of planning, unexcusable.
Right.
So that kind of thing. I mean, it just shows that you're thinking ahead a little bit, and that you're prepared. It's like, why don't you have a Sharpie? Why don't you have board tape? Why don't you have? Well, it's all digital. Well, sometimes you need a Sharpie.
Right.
It's just little things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, plan ahead for that.
Very
like,
important.
Like you
Yeah.
said, right. It seems like it keeps coming back to that. Be prepared, plan ahead. The whole relational side of the situation seems to be obviously you have to have the skills going in, you have to have the knowledge and the expertise, but a successful show seems to really be built on those foundations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Jeff, thanks so much for coming in today.
It's been great.
You've
Thank
shared
you
so
so
much
much.
knowledge with us. This has just been incredible.
Well, thanks.
I've learned
It's been
so
a
much.
pleasure.
It's really a pleasure. Well,
Great.
thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Great to see you.
You too, thanks.
Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.